In a move that shocked just about every single person who is a Jets fan or isn't a Jets fan, the Winnipeg Jets have re-signed Mark Scheifele and Connor Hellebuyck for 7 years. Have the Jets pulled off a masterstroke, or have they made one of the biggest mistakes in franchise history? We'll dive into all of that on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, my name is Harrison Lee. Welcome to this episode of Locked On Jets. I am an avid Winnipeg Jets fan, an online blogger, and you can follow me on Twitter at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. But more than anything, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDON to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for more details. Now, like I said, obviously, I had a total plan for today's episode, and of course, the Jets just blew it all away because why wouldn't they? In sort of the waning hours of the afternoon, the Jets dropped a bit of a bombshell. Mark Scheifele and Connor Hellebuyck are both staying for identical contracts, 7 years at $8.5 million per season. Now, these contracts basically came without real warning, right? No one saw this coming, and anyone who really thought that both players would actually extend long-term is probably lying, right? Because let's be honest, there was a chance that Hellebuyck might be on the verge of some sort of extension, but I don't think anyone expected it to be A, this long, and B, also paired with a Mark Scheifele extension. Like, that part just kind of like, it's mind-blowing. We've never really seen the Jets do anything like this. This is very out of character for them, and it is a huge shock because from the last discussions that we saw with respect to Scheifele, the impression was he was looking for the door. And not only was he looking for the door, but a brand new team that he could get a fresh start with. So, lo and behold, the Jets instead go the completely opposite direction and extend both of their two stars. This, I think, is a very, very gutsy decision because, let's be honest, the Jets, at this stage of where they're at in the life cycle of the team and what's happened post-relocation, you might say that the Jets are probably moving more towards a future of youth and maybe a bit of an adjustment to how they build the roster over the next few years. But now things are going to change once again. And this is a stunning move, and I think a lot of people are going to ask, is it the right one? And I think that's a very complicated question. Let's talk about the contracts themselves, right? Based on what the Jets got for both players, I actually think, relatively speaking, the extension price tag is pretty decent. Hellebuyck for 7 years at $8.5 million, that's pretty darn good, right? You expect Hellebuyck to be for at least 4 or 5 years of this contract to be elite or at least really good. And I'm going to be honest, based on how Helly has sort of aged so far and his performance over the last few years, I kind of feel like his contract is going to age gracefully. I don't know why, but I get the sense that he's going to be very good, even if he's not quite like franchise level for much of his remaining deal, which is great. The Jets could definitely use an elite starter. We know that Hellebuyck has been a Vezina winner, and we expect that he'll probably win another one at some point in the future, so it'll be nice if he would do it in Jets colors. I have to be honest, I had a really hard time imagining him wearing any other jersey. My mind just wasn't really equipped for that. And now we really don't have to worry about that. Hellebuyck is basically staying here for the duration of his career. With Scheifele, I think the value is just about there. Winnipeg in the past has had to pay a little bit more for some free agents to keep them and have them extend. And that's where I think people will look at Scheifele's deal and say, well, Winnipeg maybe got a bit of a Winnipeg tax there. With Mark, I don't know that that's necessarily true. I know that his point totals over the past couple of years may not look like the most impressive numbers, but I'm promising you, if he's motivated, if he's feeling it, if he's, consistently bought into the vision of the leadership and of the coaching staff, Scheifele is not going to be a player that you can contain. He is Winnipeg's, best finisher, and he's a great creator, someone who's very good at distributing the puck, and you know what, just an all-around, a multi-purpose offensive threat. You can basically use him for almost anything, whether it's the power play or at even strength, and he'll just about shoot the lights out. The only thing that he does not really do is defend, and we know that that's kind of been an issue with him for several years now, but so long as he is offensively elite and continuing to really play at an elite level, you're probably not going to be concerned too much. But he is kind of getting up there at the age where you start to ask yourself, is Scheifele due to fall off a cliff? We saw that with Blake Wheeler. We know how difficult that was. This is a very risky contract between him and Hellebuyck. So, yeah, I think it's not an easy answer. But, looking at Scheifele's production over the past several years, he is at an elite level. He's a number one center. He's certainly Winnipeg's number one center. And again, I think in a similar vein, it's hard to imagine him wearing another jersey. Although I will admit, I did think he was going to go to Boston at some point. I just thought that, given the departure of Bergeron and what the Jets were probably thinking about in terms of a trade package, Boston might have been one of the teams that matched what Winnipeg needed and, that Scheifele would want to move to. So very interesting. Both players have got some sort of a modified no trade clause or modified no movement clause, depending on which part of the contract we're talking about. They kick in at different points. And, obviously with the Jets having a bit of a no trade clause for certain teams, that does limit the number of places that either Hellebuyck or Scheifele can move to, but at that point, you probably don't really care that much. I think what we're seeing for the most part is that the Jets are basically locking in what they feel are two of their biggest superstars, and they're committing long-term. This is a massive, massive commitment, and it changes how Winnipeg is going to approach the next few years, because suddenly you're not really talking about the future anymore. You're talking about the here and now, which means that the Jets are going to have to kind of adjust course and start to think about how to maximize their competitive window. We've talked about this being a bit of an issue with the Jets over the past few years, and I don't know that that's going to change. Now that the Jets have Hellebuyck and Scheifele locked down, sure, you've answered one of the biggest questions surrounding this offseason, but now an even bigger one is starting to take shape, and it's how is Winnipeg going to take advantage of these two players returning and a lot of guys potentially on ELCs, along with some still pretty good value contracts that the Jets are finishing out with some of their current veterans? We'll dive into all of these questions and really the change in direction Winnipeg now needs to take in just a little bit. Before we go any further, though, I do want to shout out our friends and partners at Sleeper. The NHL season is finally here. I'm excited about it. I know you are too. We just talked about the Jets re-signing Scheifele and Hellebuyck, so I'm sure you are as eager as I am to get into the start of the regular season and see what our newly minted and extended Jets players can pull off. Now, you might be wondering how to really enjoy the sport, right? You want to get the most out of your fandom, and that's where Sleeper is a great fit for your lifestyle. Sleeper is my go-to platform for daily fantasy sports, especially daily fantasy hockey. With Sleeper, you have the chance to win up to 100 times your cash in daily fantasy. And honestly, with such an easy-to-use platform and the NHL being at one of the most exciting points in its long and storied history, there's never really been a better time to get on the action than right now. Simply select more or less based on player stats, including stuff for Hellebuyck, maybe even Scheifele, and so many other NHLers. Maybe it's goals, assists, point totals, saves, and so much more. All you have to do is just choose more or less that you think you're going to see from each of these players. And of course, you heard me. We're talking about Jets players. We're talking about some of the biggest names in the sport, including McDavid. No matter who you want to support, Sleeper has you covered. And Sleeper, of course, offers 100 times more payouts. So start paying attention, make the right picks, and you could win big. When you want to get started, be sure to use promo code LOCKEDON NHL and you'll get up to $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's Locked On NHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for joining us in tonight's episode as we try and unpack what has been, quite frankly, a ridiculous, and I mean a ridiculous day in Winnipeg Jets history. We saw an extension that I don't think anyone, least of all myself, was expecting. And not just any extension, it was a pair of them for Scheifele and Hellebuyck. If you told me that either of those guys were coming back, let alone both of them, I'm not sure I honestly would have believed you. Hellebuyck, maybe, right? I thought the signs and winds were starting to point towards that being the case. But Scheifele coming back was a massive shock to the system. And look, I'll be honest. Despite my excitement about having these two players, if you ask me personally, I think this wasn't the right choice, especially because Winnipeg is kind of in one of those places where traditionally they don't do that well maximizing, competitive windows. The Jets have had issues rounding out the roster, acquiring the right depth, and actually drafting and developing players to fill in those gaps. The whole point of why you would have these two locked up is that you surround them with talent based on, some free agents here and there, but you want to draft and develop more than anything. And that's where the Jets have really struggled over the years. We haven't really seen many prospects make it to the NHL. So for me, right, I'll be honest, I did have mixed emotions when I first heard it, because the fan part of me is thrilled to have two of our best players back, especially Hellebuyck. I love Helly. I'm a huge fan. But the other part of me is sitting here thinking, okay, so the Jets are basically committing to a competitive window of about 3 to 4 years going forward. How the heck are they actually going to take this team from a middling squad over the past few years to like a routine playoff contender? Because we haven't seen them do it consistently, right? We saw them get a year out of it in 2017 and 2018, but then after that, the Jets really failed to be all that inspiring in the following seasons. So this is a huge gamble, and it's why I sort of wonder if the Jets are going to change plans, right? With having both in tow, locked up long term, do the Jets change their approach? I don't know. I think this is one of the biggest questions that I now have, and I didn't expect to have it because I didn't think we were going to see anything like this. But the Jets basically have to go all in. And that means that prospects and picks and stuff are going to have to be on the table more frequently than I think really, the Jets want to give up. We heard them talk about not really exchanging stuff for rentals. And really, they weren't really interested in futures either, right? Winnipeg very much talked about having players who can help in the now. And maybe at the time, the whole point was to convince Hellebuyck and Scheifele that the vision of the team going forward is going to be good. But, it's just weird because I just don't know how I feel about all of this. I'm gonna need a couple of days at least to really stew on it. For all of me that enjoys having both of these guys as part of Winnipeg's core, I suppose the other, side of the coin is, well, is this core all that special, and should the Jets have made major changes? Now they can. Now we're basically locked into, the next 4+ years of their contracts, and that could come with some very big caveats and pitfalls. But I'm going to choose to be more optimistic here. Maybe Winnipeg has learned its lesson. Maybe this is where we start to see the Jets really push the envelope and go forward. It's not something that they've done in the past. They've only done it a handful of times, and it hasn't always worked out when they did, right? I think Winnipeg, got as close as it's ever going to get with that 17-18 team. But beyond that, we haven't really seen the Jets cash the chips in the most helpful ways. So looking at this and kind of thinking about it all through, the implications and stuff, all I can say is Winnipeg now has the unenviable task of having to live up to pretty huge expectations. This is going to be a major move. And now that it feels like Winnipeg's plans have changed and they're really going for the present rather than the future, it's cover bust now. The Jets are going to have to really push for it. But I suppose the positive take is that Well, now you don't have to worry about two of your biggest all-stars. You've got them committed, you've got them locked up, and for the most part, I expect them to be pretty good for much of their early starts to these new contracts. Hellebuyck, I think, will age gracefully. Maybe not so sure about Scheifele, but you know what? It is what it is. Winnipeg is going all in, and if I see them actually, live up to this and actually follow through with what it means to go all in and really cash in your chips, I can respect going with these two huge extensions. I think it does raise a lot of questions, but you know what, it is what it is. And I think the Jets have kind of tipped their hand in the past about how they wanted this to all end. But all the same, I'm still surprised and shocked that both committed to extending long term. Something must have changed with Scheifele and what was mentioned to him. I don't know if the Dubois trade really changed things. Maybe Wheeler's departure and how that all played out, how to roll in all of this. But I'm still wondering how on earth the Jets managed to sign both players. And you know what? Relatively speaking, their contracts are very reasonable. I mean, the price tags that the Jets are paying, it's not that crazy, right? $8.5 million per player seems pretty fair. And you know what? You're getting several years of quality play out of both of them. So, wow, what a doozy. That's all I can say. I guess all of this, I want to talk about whether this suggests a major new direction for the Jets or if this is what they were trying for all along. We'll talk about that and what the implications are for Winnipeg's future in just a little bit. Before we go any further, though, I do want to shout out our friends and partners at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. They offer everything from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LEDs, and so much more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. And with over 122 million parts for your number one vehicle, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. eBay also comes with eBay Guaranteed Fit. Your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. And we all know that having that guarantee can be really helpful because you don't want to waste time or money. With eBay Motors, you're not going to be burning cash. You're only going to be burning rubber. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that victory. Keep your car alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us in tonight's episode as we try and sort of process the ramifications of what Winnipeg did earlier today in extending Scheifele and Hellebuyck long-term. I think I'm still part of me not really believing it. I guess I'm still a little bit shocked that all of it went down the way that it did. One of the biggest and most explosive extensions in franchise history, and somehow the Jets fit two of them all in one go. So, wow, is all I can say. Now, I think one of the big questions is what the team's direction is from here, because we've heard Winnipeg not really be all that decisive and clear other than wanting to remain competitive. This is like the first, in my mind, clear statement of intent that the Jets are like genuinely locked in, because it felt like Winnipeg wanted to keep both Hellebuyck and Scheifele, but I think it was more on a short-term basis than a massive long-term 7-year extension. No one in their right mind, I would say, was predicting that to be the case for both players. Maybe for one of them. And I was thinking Hellebuyck, but not both. So I guess the Jets, for me, aren't necessarily changing direction so much as they are now committing to it firmly. With both players now locked in for the next several years, Winnipeg has basically kind of staked its life on this core being the one to be capable of winning the cup. And given how the Central Division is, given how the West is taking shape, I'm not sure that I necessarily agree with that. I think it's going to be really hard for the Jets to continually make the playoffs and be a perennial contender, but I do respect it if they're willing to make the right moves and actually be aggressive at the trade deadline. I think the Jets also have to be really aggressive reformatting the defense, because as it is right now, the Jets blue line, it's kind of a mess. I hate to say it, but I think this team lacks a lot of puck moving ability. I think the offensive support is not there. And for a team that talks about defensive identity and attention to detail on such a consistent basis, the Jets defense doesn't really defend all that well. I mean, some pairings do. There are some individual standouts, but for the most part, the Jets defense is kind of like a net negative value. So it's nice that at least the cap is going up and the Jets are likely to be able to get out of a couple of these contracts here in the near future because with so much money now into Hellebuyck and Scheifele, the Jets are going to have to be really smart about who they surround those guys with. And the Jets defense is going to have to be gutted and rebuilt from the ground up. The combined cap hits of Dillon, Pionk, and Schmidt all taking up like $16 million or so. That's not really sustainable. And I think it's eating up way too much cap space relative to what the Jets could be using to acquire more goal-scoring talent. That should be Winnipeg's primary focus, and I'm hoping that they make that the direction that they choose to follow going forward. So this team, man, all I can say is it's pretty wild. Winnipeg talked about staying competitive and being involved in the playoff chase as much as possible and for as long as possible. But I just did not have this on my bingo card. Both players coming back for massive long-term extensions. So for me, all I know is I definitely have a lot of questions going forward. I'd be curious to know if the Jets start to aggressively make some surgeries on the roster. I don't think it's going to happen this year. I feel like until the Jets can kind of stabilize the situation and get into a more manageable position where a buyout isn't going to leave as much dead money with term on their books, the Jets are going to ride with what they've got for the time being. So all I could say is buckle up for this year because this season suddenly just got a lot more interesting. I just can't even begin to imagine how the Jets arrived at this decision. It was crazy. It was a whirlwind of events. And you know what? For all of my uncertainty around stuff, I am still excited. I mean, I got to say, like, as a fan, this is a pretty fun time. You've got all these new arrivals and players who should really help the Jets, create more offense and score. And now that both of these guys are locked up, I wonder if that also gives a sign to guys like Velarde that, the Jets are willing to pay through the nose to keep top talent. And I don't even think the Jets overpaid. I think what they got in both contracts was either good value or, in Hellebuyck's case, pretty darn great value. So, you know what? If Velarde wants to come back after his 2-year deal is up, he's probably going to get a pretty nice-sized raise, and the Jets are going to have a very interesting core going forward. So, yeah, what a day for Jets fans. I'd love to hear your feedback. How are you feeling about this? I know that I've got so many thoughts and feelings about all of it. It's a very complicated situation, if we're being honest. And I'm sure a lot of you are probably not thrilled that Scheifele is coming back, especially after how the last couple of seasons have gone. But let me know how you're feeling. I'm sure the Hellebuyck news is at least exciting for some of you. I know for me, I personally loved it. Wow. Still trying to figure out how to feel about all of this, but I suppose my hype is going to be there. I think the Twitter reaction from what I saw was one of confusion, shock, love, hate. I mean, just about everything in between. So give me your thoughts about these new extensions in the comments below and the direction of the team, as also in the comments below and at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets on Twitter. For tonight's episode, though, that is going to be all the time that we have. Tomorrow's episode, we may do our fan bowl. We'll see how things are going. Now that Scheifele and Hellebuyck have been extended, it's certainly changed plans this week. And, of course, the season kicks off on Wednesday. So stay tuned for more Jets coverage. But like I said, for tonight's episode, that is all the time that we have. Thanks so much for making us your first listen of the day every day. As always, have a great night. And you know what? Go Jets, go.